Hey, what is going on, my fellow influencers? I want to let you know that this is the first two-part episode of the Influence Experiment. We are so excited to be able to deliver to you two quality episodes around deconstructing worldview. There was way too much content to be able to put into just a one episode, and we wanted you to hear it all as Dr. Randy Smith brings some phenomenal content to us. As in episode one, he unpacks kind of the basics of a worldview, the pillars around it, major worldviews in our faith spaces, why it is necessary to have a deepening understanding of worldview, and so on and so forth. And so really excited for you to hear and listen to this episode, but hold on because he is a wicked smart guy, and I can't wait for you to check it out.
Welcome to the Influence Experiment, where we seek to explore the art and the science of building influential capacity. Every month, we want to raise thought-provoking ideas of how you can be an investor of the influence you carry. If you're ready to journey with us, then it's time to experiment.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Influence Experiment as we seek to continue to invest our influence well. Today we are talking about deconstructing worldview. Whether we realize it or not, our lives are being shaped by general and specific worldviews. The way we view the world impacts everything we say, think, and do. But how do we understand our worldview as it seems like a very abstract concept? How do we discern which worldviews to listen to and ascribe to? This is a conversation that warrants much attention, but usually isn't given much time. How do we think well about worldview's power in our individual lives, as well as in the lives of our families, friends, teams, workspaces, etc.? In order to understand our worldview, we might need to do some deconstruction to get the why behind the why we do our lives the way we do. To help make sense of this conversation and deconstruction and understanding worldview, I've invited Dr. Randy Smith to join us. So, Dr. Randy Smith, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Tony.
Love it, man. Well, hey, would you be willing to share just a little bit about yourself before we dive in?
Sure. I'm a Bible teacher. I've pastored 3 churches over time, had 3 children, have 3 grandchildren. I'm like this 3 guy. I don't know what's happened. But basically now I work most of the time pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID. I'm out in Bible lands around the Mediterranean in Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, Italy, Malta. That's my range.
Wow.
And in those places, generally what I'm doing is how does standing on this spot help you understand these verses better? So I'm sort of a context addict, and I think that's how I got drawn into worldview. Just the idea of the big story behind the smaller narrative that we're reading and how the big story plays in.
No, that's awesome, man. I love how much travel, how much your region, how much you travel and get around. I've had the privilege to go to Israel and Turkey and Greece myself, and so I've loved being able to go over there, and I'm jealous that might be a regular thing for you. Hey, as we kind of dive into this abstract, odd topic of deconstruction of worldview, knowing that it's a kind of a word that's been thrown out a lot lately, would you be able just to help define the table here of what is a worldview and what are some of the pillars that would make up someone's worldview?
Sure. Your worldview is essentially the lens through which you see the world. And ultimately, it's the interface between the foundational ideas of your life and the choices that you make because of those foundational things. Now, classically, a worldview is made up of 4 things. So origin, purpose, destiny, morality. And what's important about that is that how you believe, what you believe specifically about how we got here, or why we're here, or where we're going, affects directly your morality. So why right is right, good is good, wrong is wrong, and bad is bad is directly connected to, well, how did we get here? So, for a Christian, it's easy. As a Jesus follower, it's easy. I can say, because I have a personal God, I know where that goes in terms of defining things. Now, both of those positions that are kind of polar in our world, but very influential, the naturalist or humanist position and the revelatory position. The revelatory or prophetic position is what we would say is a cosmogony of a Christian, but it's not only Christian. Other people have other God scenarios, other holy books. They're revelatory as well. So there's a divide on worldviews. Half of them on this side say, God is God spoke, we've got his book, this is what we do. The other half say, God isn't, God didn't speak. This is a random process that we found meaning in because humans need meaning, but essentially we're not thinking that something exterior to us has produced that meaning. So the two sides of that line have defined themselves in the academy now. So you go to college and you go to university, you're going to hear one or the other of that side of line. It used to be more professors were revelatory and cosmogony, and now it's more naturalists in cosmogony, and that's become the darling of the academy. And I'm not trying to cast any dark aspersions on it, just saying that's what's happening. And so a kid who grows up on a farm who believes God and apple pie and pickup trucks gets out to the university, and all of a sudden what he's got is a naturalist cosmogony that says it's random, and he feels something right away, but it's actually shuddering well beneath the words. It's the conceptual idea that's shuddering. So let me pose that there's really three levels to this. The lowest level for a Jesus follower is the foundational level of a cosmological battle between God telling his story and an enemy that is told about in the book. And so that as a Jesus follower, I conceptualize that I came into the world during a fight. It was already going on. Now, that's not all it is, and it's not all this horrifying fight language, but that exists within our text. Then the next level, the level above that, is worldview. And worldviews as a Jesus follower come from somewhere in the metaphysical world. In other words, my belief, even as a follower of Jesus, comes because of the Spirit of God leading me to repentance and helping me to understand what I cannot see. The same is true on the other side as well. I'm just posing it so that there's a foundational level that is, let's say spiritual. And then the next level is worldview. And then you get up here to the choices, and that's where you get into the political and all of that.
Yeah. No, thanks for even breaking down those three concepts. And so generally speaking, you spoke in the lens of kind of a random worldview, natural worldview, or like a revelatory or divine worldview, right? That's kind of how you would break them apart, generally speaking.
Right. And it's a lot of it's based on the theory that, God spoke is the foundation for one side of it. The other side of it is that's not really how we got here or why we're here. It's really us looking for some meaning in what is a random series of events going no particular place.
Got it. Okay. No, that makes sense. And so like, would you, speaking of these like random or revelatory worldviews, would you be able to kind of paint a quick picture of some of the major worldviews in our culture and faith spaces?
I think so. When I go into the academy, you get the same set of questions. As a Jesus follower in an academic community, what someone will say is, how do you know there's a God? How do you know you got the right one? How do you know your books are really reflective of the creator of the universe? And what they're asking is, look, there are other world religions out there that dominate and affect whole cultures. In the Middle East, obviously, Islam plays a huge role. And so people will ask, very rightly, they'll astutely ask, how do you know that what you're saying, reflects an ultimate reality? And I'll go back and say, look, first of all, there's only about eight world religions, okay? Second, most people aren't running for God. I know it sounds funny, but in many world religions, they're promising a nirvana or a peace, but not necessarily addressing a divine being. Confucianism was a system of thought and expression, not necessarily leading you to a God. Gautama, the Buddha, wasn't necessarily trying to get you to be communing with God as much as being connected in peace and kind of a tranquility. So if you take the 8 world religions and you kind of take them down, and I'm only including 8, there are many, but these are the major streams. You get down to very few who are actually positing, look, I'm the creator and you can meet me on these terms. Okay. When you split those out, what you find is that there's very few actually making a claim that they can lead you to a place where you're not only at peace, but you're actually having an intimate personal relationship with the creator or something like that. All the religions of the world can be stacked up in basically one idea. Here's our rules. Live according to these standards. You get a paycheck when you die. Heaven, peace, whatever that is. Christianity, in contradistinction, starts with the opposite. It starts with, here are the rules. You can't do it. You will never be able to pull it off. Don't even try. You're not going there if it's based on you. However, you have a creator who loved you, who knows you can't pull it off, sent his son to die for you, and in inserting himself into the picture and doing it for you, he created a way that is undeserved and accessible by faith, by grace through faith. And ultimately, Christianity starts with a view of humanity that is, I think, realistic, as opposed to there's somehow I can kind of pull up my bootstraps spiritually and become such a good guy that I will earn this. So one is an earned quotient, the other one is an undeserved one. And that has an outworking in the worldview of how it plays out and what attitudes rise to the surface as value. So for instance, in Christianity, humility will be a high value. In a random cosmogony, in a naturalist world, go out there and promote yourself because it's actually what you push about yourself that becomes important in the business world, as opposed to humility then is scaled back as a value. And it has to do with actually the level of what we think is even most important in life.
No, I think that you, I love the way you actually stated this idea of like that random naturalist worldviews or other religions, other religions have this idea of like the paycheck idea of like, oh, like when I die, I'm going to get a paycheck from what I've done. And then the reverse side of Christianity is like, no, like you can't do it and you can't measure up. And that's grace that we talk about, right? But that we still have a relationship with God. And so that was really helpful actually to kind of break apart that between like Christianity and other religions. So thank you for that. Why do you think it's necessary to pursue a deeper understanding and continuing understanding of how we view the world?
Well, there's an old saying that to a man with Limburger cheese on his mustache, the world stinks. And the idea there is, when you have something between you as a barrier between you and the world, or you have, I wear these glasses and they have a nice scratch right down the center. I need to get them replaced, but in the meantime, I negotiate the scratch. So everything I see has a cut right in the middle of it. What's important is, if I don't stop and reflect why I see what I see, I won't understand reflectively what my values really are. I think a lot of people, it's like I woke up, I went to work, I came home, I ate dinner, I watched TV, I fell asleep, I woke up, I went to, and days go into weeks, go into months, and we never stop to ask the question, do I agree with how I'm living? Does this actually match who I want to be when I grow up? Because I thought it was going to be this, I was going to get out of school and I was going to have this adventure in life. And now it's mostly going to work, paying bills and trying to figure out, what's the weekend going to be about. In that lack of reflection, there's a sadness. As a pastor, I would counsel people through this sadness of middle age where they come in, you don't know about this yet, but you will, where you come into this thing where all of a sudden you're going, is this all I'm going to be? I could have been a contender. I thought I was going to be more. And it's not that they really are unhappy with what they have. It's that they stopped being reflective, got busy doing it. Worldview and understanding how we view the world helps us take a breath and stop just plowing through and ask the question, does this road take me where I think I want to go? Is this meaningful to me? And why do I care so much about this, but not that? And other people seem to really care about that, but that doesn't move me at all. So I think if we allow the lenses through which we view all things to be obscured or blurred, what we're going to find is that we're going to end up at a destination we never intended to be, and then wake up with the kind of discouragement of, I didn't become what I wanted to be.
Yeah, no, I can totally see how understanding a worldview and having a deepening understanding makes you it in a good way. I think it jars you into why, is this what I want to become, or why am I doing what I'm doing? And it can be that roadmap guiding you towards a fuller understanding of self, or again, pursuing the goal, mission, whatever of your life. And so how do we see worldviews operating on an individual level as well as a societal level? Take a minute or two to think through that one with us.
Well, one of the things that happened to worldviews is it became kind of a heady subject. So it's really not. Every one of us has a worldview, and we're looking at the world. It's like saying eyes. We all have eyes. We see the world through these eyes. And people think that this is a wrestling over political values when it's much, much deeper. The reason people are where they are politically has to do with where they are morally. The reason they are where they are morally has to do with origin, purpose, destiny, and that is what informs their morality. So when in the 70s, when they were basically showing the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob the door in the public school and saying, you're not acceptable for the encounters of our elementary school students, they were actually adjusting morality. So but they didn't give us another foundation for morality. Our founders in the country gave us one that was based on an origin, purpose, and destiny that was Judeo-Christian. And I'm not saying they were all Christians. I'm just saying that you can't argue that they weren't marinated in a Judeo-Christian value system. So when they say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men have a creator, well, that's not a self-evident truth in the academy today, but it was in the 18th century. When you change the foundation, you change the outworking. And what I appreciated about Truman in his book is he lays out how these came to be without prejudging them. Because I got to tell you, as a Jesus follower, one of the mistakes we make is we enter the public square first with a lack of sensitivity, I think in general, and second with a if you all could get your act together, you'd be us, and kind of a provincialism. And the truth is, look, we are humans on a journey. We're trying to figure out what this is and how to get there. But the easiest way to summarize that division between, say, the naturalist and revelatory cosmogony is in a simple statement of worldview. Now, maybe to paint a picture, just to make a backdrop, I'm going to assume that many of your listeners have a reasonable idea, a churched idea, not necessarily Christian in the sense of the New Testament, but a general moral frame or worldview that sits well on top of a biblical understanding. Sure. So maybe I want to lean more into a secularist one and see this is how you would define your worldview in general. Now, everything we're going to do, Einstein said everything should be broken down to its simplest components, but not simpler than it really is. This is going to be simpler than it really is. Okay. This is kind of a chart view of a naturalist. Okay. But I want you to imagine for a minute, Tony, that you removed God from the picture. You removed revelation from the picture. We're just a bunch of guys on a rock trying to figure it out. And you end up with, okay, so what we've determined is that there's a footprint of nature. There seems to be some kind of system here, but we don't know where it comes from. So our origin is going to be random, but not necessarily inconsistent. So there are laws that bubbled to the surface somehow, but we're not really going to state, kind of agnostically not state where they came from. So what's the center of our world? Whereas a Jesus follower might put his center of his world to follow his savior and to serve the world because he loved them. I serve Jesus by serving other people. If I don't have that, I work, for instance, a lot in a Jewish context. many Jews have no afterlife. If you believe you're one and done, that's it, this is it, then the center is, what do I leave humanity behind? Do I make a better world by giving more money to public television? Yeah, do I help my children and grandchildren that way? And I'm remembered in their mind, and that's how I live again after I die. So it's a memory evocation, okay? In a world like that, you see that there's a kindness that does come out toward the coming generations. But authority ultimately is rooted in self. So the deepest meaning is found not in like discovering intimacy with God as a creator, but rather self-actualization, figuring out what my talents and potentialities are so that I could grab onto that and be the best me I could be. So my moral statements then are all going to be, does that help Joe, George, Sally? Does that help them become the best version of them? That's what's moral. And on top of that, then, I'm going to build my ethical development will be, I'm going to do whatever will help the majority of people to self-actualize well. Okay? So it's good for society if it helps people become the best version of themselves it can and brings peace and stability so that that environment can happen. Now, what's interesting is for Jesus followers, they may not be aware of this, but First John unpacks the idea of there's following Jesus, and then there's following this other path. And he calls the other path antichrist, but he also calls it lawlessness. Anomia doesn't mean I don't have rules. It means I make up my own.
Yep.
So what he's saying, and by the way, that 1 John 3 is that terrible passage that says, no man who knows Jesus sins. But what sin is in the passage is makes up his own rules. So what he's saying is nobody who follows Jesus makes up his own rules. That's what he's saying. And the devil has made up his own rules from the beginning. And when you supply the self-written definitions in 1 John 3, it makes sense. My point is, there's an ethical development. If you have no God, if you are heading for no heaven, you don't have an afterlife necessarily, but you're a part of the baton of the world being passed from hand to hand through the generations, and that's who you think you are, then you're going to be about self-actualization, but you're going to think that human emancipation, that is the ability for people to make up their own rules and self-actualize, is the highest ethic. That's why you're going to have a conflict with any of us who are coming at this and going, wait a minute, there's a Bible out there. Wait a minute, there's a God out there. Wait a minute, there's pleasing him. You're going to be going, yeah, but that doesn't always work to help people self-actualize the best way. And so there's going to be a reaction. And there's some wrestling we're going through as believers that isn't really us, but it's the necessary consequences of what we're saying. If there's a master, I'm going to follow him. If I'm going to follow him and say there's a master, the person who says mastery is the worst possible thing, they're going to look at my message as negative. I don't know if that made sense, but it does in my mind, and that should count for something.
No, wow, that was a lot, and I love just how you're clearly incredibly passionate about this, and your articulation over this is deeply profound. If we can all grasp everything that you're saying here, and it's so rich, and so thank you for kind of speaking into that piece. And so if you could take just a quick second to unpack this one, how does one go about deconstructing their worldview in an attempt to truly answer what they believe about the world?
I think that there's always a moment in life when a man understands he's not going to be a professional ball player. Now, that for me was not today by looking at me. But there's a time when you realize your life is going to be a certain thing. I think when you stop right there and say, how did I get here? When you say, what am I doing here? Why do I believe I'm here? Where are we all going? What's the destiny here? Because I think what happens is, we say, I'm against this and I'm for this, but it's not necessarily logically fit within the frame of where we're going and how we got here. Ask the big questions. If you ask the big questions, it's going to help you to stop. I was just reading this morning from a guy who was talking about how his life is so fast. And, I put 120,000 air miles on the year before COVID. I'm flying all over the place, and I'm most of the year outside the country. I understand the temptation to allow the busy to overrun the important, but you got to ask the hard questions, or you're going to wake up one day and go, what was my life? And that's too late.
Yeah, no, I think you're so right to say we need to be willing to ask the tough questions, the diagnostic and analytical questions over our life, which takes lots of intentionality, right? To be able to do something like that. And so speaking of being like analytical, in our last episode, we focused on this statement of living in unity rather than uniformity. Does this statement have its place in the conversation of worldview?
I think it does. I think, first of all, I'm going to, again, come at this as a Jesus follower. If someone's listening and they're not from that, they can kind of grid that out. But because I am that, I'm going to look at the world that God made from my perspective and say, does everything have to be uniform to be united? There's this interesting little passage in the Bible that says, when you put the stones of the altar together, don't cut them. I like the stones I made, God says. In my worldview, the stones that fit together are supposed to not fit together quite so well because we're all individuals. I think there's a mistake in religion to carve off the edges and make everything, in order to unite it more easily, to make it uniform. And the problem with that is, and you see this, look, guys come in to a local church with 5 different radio stations playing when they came in the parking lot, but we're all supposed to agree to that one type that they have from the platform that morning. That's the kind of music that God likes, or something like that. And of course, it doesn't work, right? We're different. I happen to believe religiously that chocolate is superior to vanilla. And of course, I believe everyone else is living in abject poverty and ignorance. The bottom line is that unity doesn't require that level of assent. And I'll tell you where this bumps into us. Does everybody have to be a Republican or a Democrat in order to be part of the United Faith? Well, clearly not. Does everybody have to line up on one side of every issue? I'm not saying there aren't absolutes, biblically speaking, as a Jesus follower, that if you claim to be one, you can't be a Jesus, a pedophiles for Jesus. That we don't have such a thing. This is right, this is wrong. But I'm saying that a lot of the outworkings of a worldview come down to, it's not just preferences. It's more than preferences. It's moral statements. So, for instance, if you're a naturalist and you believe that your prime desires for human emancipation, your language is not going to be as oriented toward spiritual liberty. It's going to be freedom from oppression. It's going to all be about emancipation from oppression. And there's going to be a lot of victimization language that's built in, packed into your worldview. And so you're going to see equality as only when everybody everywhere can do absolutely anything at any time, because that makes them equal. Well, that's a definition of equality that's different than those of us who are Jesus followers. We see equality as function is different than value. I'm a parent, but I don't have a womb. I don't function the same as my wife, but my value is equal in my child. And so I'm not out there trying to figure out how I can get men to have a womb. It makes sense why they would do it, because the egalitarian vision of everybody being able to do everything at all times in order to be equal and emancipating people, and since their ultimate truth is experience, you can't really know it if you didn't experience it. That's why they're driven to these ends. In the end, there's a direct connection between unity and uniformity, but they're not the same thing. We need to be careful to be able to say to people, particularly when you're coming from a view where there's different in function but equal in value, that unity becomes a statement of, I see your value while I know you're different. And unity allows for that. Uniformity does not.
Yeah. Wow, no, I think that's incredibly profound to be able to talk about this concept of unity and uniformity have its place together, but they are a little distinct. Anything about this idea of like function and value is not the same. So I think that's a really good phrasing to kind of help us understand that concept a little bit better. So thanks for speaking into that. And as we continue on here, like we look at like the influence experiment, this podcast is all about finding the art and science of building influential capacity. Like, what would you say is some of the science, like the objective truth behind deconstructing and understanding worldview, and then some of the art, some of the subjective personal expression behind deconstructing, understanding worldview?
Well, first of all, you're talking to a person who's an archaeological and historical mind, and not a great one, but I am one. And as a teacher and professor in that areas of history, I'm going to ask the question: what are the underlying value systems that have come into our world that are setting up the conflicts of worldview that we're going through? Because I think the reason we're really having a worldview discussion right now is because it's not particularly going well. We're having a real battle, and sometimes we're finding ourselves interpersonally turned off by someone that if we understood them, we could love them more effectively. We could, for instance, you go to a Thanksgiving and people come together and it blows up, and people say, well, you can't talk about politics. They think everything's politics, but actually the worldview you were discussing 20 minutes before you got to the political outworkings was already a problem. Things were getting heated up. So I would say this: if you're trying to influence people, you're going to have to understand where various ideas come from. You're going to have to understand why they are saying what they're saying. There is a problem. You and I, just on screen here, represent two different generations. My generation has not been as embracing and forgiving to understand the language and the basic approach, worldview-wise, of yours. And there's a reason. I would tell you up front, I get in front of college students all the time and say, I apologize, not for what I believe, but for the attitude that casts kind of a negativism. Here's our line. Well, we had the good America. You got this one. Sorry. Wait for Jesus to come back. And it's this very negative, non-revivalist, non-excitement, not forward-thinking hope and vision. And I think it's because we've seen a change. And remember, our window is different in size. We've seen what was. Now, worldviews are forged over time. So you ask about the influence and the science part of this. I would say this: the science part has to do with understanding the historical frames from which different ideas come. The art has to do with the individual flair of how you wear that. Okay, So let's just draw a line for a second. We have in the academy today the rise of what we're often calling cultural Marxism. But for a lot of people, they don't have any idea what that is. They just know that Marx had a big beard and he was, a philosopher and a thinker from the 19th century, and they don't really know anything else about it. He comes from a Jewish line. His family comes from a rabbinic background, and he's a very intelligent guy. And although he never expressed any clear view of a supreme being, in fact, he didn't like the idea of a creator, he did talk a lot about the devil, interestingly enough. And he was at the University of Berlin. He didn't graduate from there, but he was at that university. And while he was there, he was basically forming something bigger than political science. It was really a worldview. And he and a fellow by the name of Engels put together what's now 50 different volumes of their ideas. Wow. What's weird is you and I teach about influence, okay? And in influence, we would be discipling people, coming along, mentoring people. We would want to be a winsome and outreaching. He was none of those things. Marx was a drunk who stayed up all hours of the night, who stunk. And his own family didn't deal well with him. He had an illegitimate child. 2 of his daughters had suicide by a pact with their husbands. It's a very dark life. And yet this guy's philosophy now is an underwriting of a worldview that a third of the world is going after. There is, by the way, he was openly racist in his writings, which I find interesting. He had vitriol against his foes that were just terrible language. But here's the point. Because underneath part of the academy right now is this cultural Marxism, there's this idea that America can't be kind of rejuvenated. It has to be bulldozed and the foundation has to be rewritten. So looking at something as simple as, and I can't do that all in this little programming, but looking at something as simple as Marx's view of the family and Marx's view of oppression will help you understand when three founders of Black Lives Matter say, we are Marxists, you have to ask, what does that mean? It means that we fundamentally don't believe you can fix America. You have to bulldoze the foundation and start again. It means what Marx said about the family. If you don't get the women upset, you'll never overturn their society. So you've got to tell them that they're oppressed, and you've got to make sure that they feel that oppression. Because if they don't, you're not going to create the revolution you want. And then he used to walk around muttering this over and over and over. Mephistopheles has a great line from Faust. Everything that exists deserves to perish. That used to be what he'd walk around muttering. You need to understand that there's a deconstruction that's intentional, and it's going on in universities near you. Your kids go off to school, come back with this deconstructed worldview, but it's based on the science of a historical figure and philosophical subset. And we're sending them in kind of wild-eyed going, I just want to grow up and be a doctor. Well, that's wonderful. But underneath of it, what they're saying to you is everyone's a victim. Victimology is very important. And you need to understand that we're bulldozing this Judeo-Christian ethic that created victimology. That undoes historically what our founders did. Not for nothing, but I got to land the plane, I know. But Jefferson, Madison, these were guys who carefully studied a worldview before they constructed documents of government. And that's something we've forgotten. They weren't just a bunch of guys sitting around writing, hey, we want to get rid of the king and let's do it this way. They were deep thinkers that studied Greek philosophy, studied history. They knew why they wanted to do what they did. And that's what drove them.
Yeah. No, even just thank you for that history lesson even on Karl Marx, because it's so crucial to understand where things come from. Like you said, kind of asking these diagnostic or analytical questions. Well, you have to get those layers deeper than just, I want to do this. Well, where did that come from? And that could turn to looking back at history. And so I think that's super helpful as we understand this and how Marxism really does permeate a lot of our culture or ideologies sometimes. Man, what a powerful conversation thus far with Dr. Randy Smith. And if you're like me, man, my head is throbbing. There's so much wisdom and insight and knowledge he has thrown at us. And if you're like me, you have to go back and listen to this a second time. And maybe this is something you can take to somebody and have a conversation with them and have a deeper understanding and processing about worldview and why it's so important to allow this to ask questions in the process with people, safe people around you, because it's such a vital topic to understand. And so as we dive into the second episode, it's going to be a lot more around our faith and religion, how that intersects with our worldviews. And we hope that you will check that episode out to get the whole package of Deconstructing Worldview. And we also hope that you would share this with someone that you think might be interested in listening to it. Give us a comment and a rating wherever you consume the content. And then we hope that you will join us next time as we continue to explore the art and the science of building influential capacity. Catch you next time.